When you think of the courage of David, you probably go straight to Goliath, right? It's hard to dig into that story and get the size of Goliath and the army that he's backing down for 40 days. It is God's army nonetheless. And Saul the king is scared, and his brother Eliab is scared and gets on to him. And so he shows this great courage, and he makes quick decisions, and he walks up and says things to this giant man. And if David would have just had that courage when he messed up with Bathsheba. I'm Zach. This is The Average Christian. It's a project about having a relationship with God. What does that mean, and how do I live that out? And so one of these things is about courage. And this one is the courage to come back. Some of you have never had to come back from things, and you've been faithful and you've stayed that way. And you've had smaller battles, but you've never just given up. Some of you have and have exhibited this courage. And all of us should heed the words of 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 12. Take heed, basically, those who think they stand, lest we should fall. And I know that's not an exact quote, but the idea is there. Don't ever, ever, ever think that you will never do this kind of thing, or this will never happen to you, or you'll never walk. It could happen to anybody. And here is King David, who could have been courageous when he messed up with, funny enough, the way you pronounce her name. In the South, it's Bathsheba. It's Bathsheba. But I'm not going to say that because you won't know who I'm talking about. But when he sinned with Bathsheba, if he would have just had the courage to admit what he did, her wife, she wouldn't have been a widow, grieving this guy that David murdered. That's how God said it, and Nathan explained it to him. But he does exhibit courage later on. So when you meet David and you see in 2 Samuel chapter 11, I'm not going to read necessarily, but you can go back and read about this. He should have been off to war in the springtime, when that's what kings did, as they went off to war. He has sent his men out. He's not with them. He's up on the roof and sees Bathsheba bathing and calls for her, essentially, sends his servants or his men after her. I don't know what that encounter was like. People ask me about that. I don't know if she was raped. I don't know if she was forced. I don't know if she just felt so pressured, or if she was attracted to David. He's was apparently a good-looking guy. Whatever the case is, he has her come to him. It was brought to him, and he has sex with her, and she ends up pregnant. Big problem now. Now he wants to bring in Uriah, her husband. He's off to war where David should have been, but he brings in Uriah, and he acts like he wants to know how the war is going, and then tells him, I'll send you back in the morning, assuming he'll go back to his house with his wife and lay with her, and then he can pawn off the kid and say it's Uriah's. So he's already plotting. That doesn't work because Uriah has too much honor and too much respect for his men, and he won't do that while his men are out to war, so he sleeps outside. David's first plan doesn't work. Second plan, get him drunk, and then send him back to his house in that drunken stupor. He'll forget about his honor. It doesn't work again. So now we got to send this guy back. He does, and he tells the leader of the army that I want you to put him on the front where the action is the heaviest, and at a certain time I want you to pull back. So he has him murdered. Leaves him out there, and David never just outright admits. It's only when he's busted by Nathan the prophet, who comes to him and tells him this story, and David's anger is kindled greatly by the injustice in this story, and Nathan has to tell him, you are the man. To David's credit, and I hope this rings for those of you who are faithful now. Maybe some of you will watch this and you have left and you have done something terrible, or you just turned your back on God and walked away. I hope this will encourage you to come back. And here is this guy, and he fell hard. I've seen Christians who are on these pedestals, whether fairly or unfairly, and they fall, and you never hear from them again. You never see them again. They offered great things, and then they disappear. David had the courage to come back. And that's difficult. You imagine how we judge people in the spotlight. This is the most popular man, one of the most popular in Old Testament history, certainly the most popular of his time. He's the king of Israel, the man after God's own heart. Imagine how they talked about him, how they felt about him. Well, he finds out from Nathan that his household is going to be cursed from now on because of this, and that child that Bathsheba is pregnant with is going to die, and the child is born and is immediately sick. And David goes into mourning and fasting and praying and hits the ground. His servants don't know what to do with him. He looks a mess. They don't know how to approach him. Eventually the child dies, or very shortly after the child dies, and they don't know how to tell him. They're afraid if he's this distraught while the child was alive, he's going to come unglued. He hears and figures that's probably what happened, asks them, they admit to it. And then he gets up and cleans himself up. And the first thing he does is he goes out and worships God, the same God that punished him by taking this child, same God he's been praying to, who said no, apparently, and the child still died. The first thing he does is go worship God. Then he comes back and he has a meal, and his servants are beside themselves while the child was still alive. You laid on the ground, you wouldn't eat, you prayed, and then the child dies and you jump up and go on with life. And David explains to them there's nothing he could do about it. He was hoping the Lord would be merciful, but if not, there's nothing he could do to change it. And he can't bring the child back to him, but he knows he'll see the child later on. After that, you see him go in and be a husband to Bathsheba. This poor lady has had her husband murdered, lost her child here. I can't remember if it was her first. I believe it was, but has lost her child. David goes in, comforts her. Apparently they patch things up because next comes Solomon. He's born. Then as a king, he goes back to being king. He goes back to leading his men in battle. And that's called a comeback. And I don't have the time in this short video here to talk about all that he must have gone through. I know what it's like to come back. Now, I'm not saying that as a means to give myself any credit, but I know what it's like to fall hard at 20 years old and stand in front of a congregation of people and tell them and admit what I did only when there was no other way to go about it. And then have people deal with you in a way and have lowered expectations and all those. And I'm begging you, please, to remember that God always wants us. And so if you do fall like this, look at David and have the courage enough to face what mess you've made and what mess you're in, and realize there is a future. There are possibilities. Go with those things and come back to God and go with him. I want to thank you for being with us today. If you're watching on YouTube, we appreciate you being here. We want you to subscribe. If you haven't already, you can hit that button. Over here is a video that YouTube recommends and our latest release before this video. Please like this. If it helps you, like it. It helps get the word out. For those listening on podcast, thank you for being with us. We ask you to subscribe, rate, and review. And everyone, whether you're watching on Facebook, we need to mention those people as well. Thank you for watching. Please share this so other people can see it. Maybe it'll help them too.